I'm Janice Wood, 34, a commercial real estate attorney who built her practice from nothing after growing up in foster care. After 8 years together, I thought my partner Marcus and I had created the family I'd always dreamed of until he chose to spend our anniversary celebrating his ex-girlfriend's birthday instead. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. But what shattered me completely was his casual dismissal when I confronted him. "Sarah's been in my life longer than you have," he said, as if our years together meant nothing. That night, as I stared at our joint financial documents and the will that left him everything I'd worked for, something shifted inside me. He had no idea that his careless words would cost him more than he could imagine. Because what Marcus didn't know was that I'd already discovered the real reason he'd been prioritizing. Sarah and the truth would change everything between us forever. If you've ever felt invisible in your own relationship, you will understand why I had to take back my power. I met Marcus 8 years ago at a legal conference in Chicago. He was working as a financial advisor, charming and confident in that easy way that comes from growing up with stability. I was 26 then, still carrying the sharp edges of someone who'd learned early that the only person you could truly count on was yourself. The foster care system had taught me that lesson well. 13 different homes before I aged out at 18, each one promising to be different. Each one proving that promises were just words people used when they needed something from you. But Marcus felt different. When he looked at me, he saw potential, not damage. When I told him about my past, he didn't flinch or offer empty platitudes. He just listened. "You're the strongest person I've ever met," he said on our third date, his fingers tracing patterns on my hand as we sat in that little cafe near my law school. Most people would have given up. I hadn't given up because giving up wasn't an option. I'd worked 2 jobs through undergrad, taken out loans I was still paying off, and clawed my way into law school with nothing but determination and a GPA that refused to bend. By the time I met Marcus, I was already building my practice, specializing in commercial real estate because buildings were solid, contracts were clear, and property law didn't care about your emotional baggage. Marcus understood ambition. He had his own goals, his own dreams of building something lasting. We spent hours talking about the future we'd create together, the house we'd buy, the life we'd build, the family we'd become. Not just a couple, but a real family. The kind I'd never had. When we bought the house on Maple Street 3 years ago, I cried signing the deed. Marcus held my hand as I wrote my name next to his, both our names on the same document, legally bound to something beautiful and permanent. The kitchen had these huge windows that let in morning light, and I could picture myself making coffee there every day for the next 30 years. "This is it," Marcus had whispered in my ear as we got the keys. "This is where we start our real life together." We opened joint accounts, combined our finances, planned for a future that seemed as solid as the foundation of our house. I had money more than Marcus realized from my successful practice, and I gladly shared it all. What was the point of financial success if you couldn't build something meaningful with the person you loved? The first few years were everything I'd dreamed of. Marcus would bring me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings, and we'd read the paper together, planning home, improvements, and vacations. He supported my career, bragged about my victories to his friends, and never made me feel like my success was threatening to his masculinity. But something shifted about a year ago. It was subtle at first. Phone calls he'd taken another room, text messages that made him smile in ways that felt private, exclusive of me. When I asked about it, he'd wave me off with explanations about work or old friends getting back in touch. "You worry too much," he'd say, kissing my forehead like I was being silly. "Everything's fine, Janice. We're fine." But I'd learned to trust my instincts long before I learned to trust other people. And my instincts were telling me that the foundation we'd built was starting to crack. The first red flag was Marcus putting his phone face down during dinner. For 6 years, his phone had lived openly on the table between us, notifications lighting up the screen without secrecy. We'd answer each other's phones, share funny texts, and never think twice about it. Suddenly, every buzz and chime became something he needed to check privately. "Work stuff," he'd say, sliding the phone into his pocket when I glanced at it. "You know how clients are." But I knew Marcus's work habits. Financial advising didn't typically require urgent responses at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, or secretive phone calls taken in the garage during our favorite TV shows. Then came the late nights. Marcus had always been home by 6:30, complaining good-naturedly about traffic and ready to decompress with dinner and conversation. But those reliable evenings became unpredictable. 7 o'clock, then 8, then calls at the last minute saying he grabbed something on the way home. Big client presentation coming up, he'd explain, loosening his tie with one hand while texting with the other. You know how it is. I did know how it was. I worked long hours too, built my practice on 16-hour days and weekend prep sessions. But I also knew the difference between legitimate work pressure and convenient excuses. The name, Sarah, started appearing in our conversations like a persistent weed. At first, it was casual mentions. Sarah from college had moved back to town after her divorce. She was having a hard time adjusting, needed advice about her finances, remembered Marcus as being so good with money. She's having a rough time, Marcus would say when I'd catch him texting late at night. The divorce was messy and she doesn't have anyone else to talk to about financial planning. I tried to be understanding. I really did. My own experience with abandonment made me sensitive to other people's pain, and I didn't want to be the jealous girlfriend who couldn't handle her partner helping an old friend. When Marcus mentioned that Sarah needed someone to look at her investment portfolio, I even suggested he invite her over for dinner so I could meet her properly. That's not necessary, Marcus said quickly. She's pretty private about her situation. I think she'd be embarrassed. That response should have been a siren going off in my head, but I chose to interpret it charitably. Some people were private about their finances. Some people felt ashamed about divorce. I was projecting my own need for openness onto a situation. I didn't fully understand that my friend Claire wasn't as generous in her interpretations. We were having lunch at our usual spot downtown when I mentioned Marcus's increased involvement in Sarah's problems. Wait, Claire said, setting down her sandwich. This is the same Sarah from the photos in his college albums? The one he dated for 3 years? I nodded, feeling suddenly uncomfortable with where this was heading. Janice, Claire's voice was gentle but firm. You know, this isn't normal, right? Men don't typically become financial advisors to their ex-girlfriends unless there's something else going on. I defended him, of course, listed all the reasonable explanations, all the ways this could be innocent. Claire listened patiently, but I could see the concern in her eyes. I just want you to protect yourself, she said finally. You've worked too hard to build what you have to let someone take advantage of your kindness. But I wasn't ready to hear it. I was still operating from a place of trust, still believing that the man who'd held my hand through panic attacks and celebrated every professional victory was incapable of deception. I told myself that Claire was being paranoid, that not every man was like her cheating ex-husband. The screenshots came by accident. Marcus had borrowed my laptop to check something while his was updating, and when he handed it back, his text. Messages were still open on the screen. I saw Sarah's name at the top of several conversations, timestamps showing messages sent during our dinner dates, our movie nights, our quiet mornings in bed. Thanks for listening last night. You always know what to say. I miss talking to you like this. It feels like old times. I'm so glad you're back in my life. I closed the laptop without reading further, my hands shaking slightly. There were innocent explanations for those messages. There had to be. I just needed to think them through logically, the way I'd analyze evidence in a legal case. But late that night, lying next to Marcus as he slept peacefully, I realized I was working harder to make excuses for his behavior than he was working to reassure me about it. And that shift in effort from him proving his trustworthiness to me convincing myself to trust him felt like the most dangerous warning sign of all. I woke up on our 8th anniversary with the kind of anticipation I hadn't felt in months. For weeks, I'd been planning the perfect evening reservations at Chez Laurent, the French restaurant where Marcus had first told me he loved me, followed by a walk through the botanical gardens where we'd had our first real conversation about the future. I'd even taken the afternoon off, something I rarely did, to get my hair done and pick up the vintage watch I'd been having restored for him. It was his grandfather's amaga, the one piece of family jewelry he'd inherited, and the face had cracked last year. Getting it fixed had taken months of working with a specialist. But seeing it gleaming in its presentation box made every phone call worth it. Marcus was already in the shower when I came back from the jeweler's, steam fogging the bathroom mirror as he sang off-key the way he always did when he was happy. I smiled, setting the watch box on his dresser where he'd see it after getting dressed. Maybe this anniversary would reset whatever had been off between us lately. "Morning, beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek as he emerged from the bathroom, towel around his waist. "Sleep well?" "Perfectly." I handed him his coffee, prepared exactly how he liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream. "Happy anniversary, Marcus." "Anniversary?" He froze. The cup halfway to his lips, my stomach dropped. "Our anniversary." 8 years today. Oh, shit. He set the coffee down hard, sloshing it onto the dresser. "Janice, I'm so sorry." I completely forgot. Sarah's birthday's today, and I already promised I'd help her celebrate. Her divorce was finalized last week, and she's been really depressed about spending her first birthday alone in 15 years. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, the moment when he'd laugh and tell me he was joking. But Marcus was already moving around the room, pulling clothes from drawers with the focused energy of someone solving a problem. "You forgot our anniversary," I said slowly, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "I can make it up to you," he said quickly, not meeting my eyes. "Tomorrow night or this weekend, we'll do something special." "You forgot our anniversary for Sarah's birthday." "It's not like that." Marcus's voice had that edge it got when he felt cornered. "Look, I know it seems bad, but Sarah's been through hell lately. Her ex-husband cleaned out their joint accounts, and she's starting over with nothing. She needs people in her corner right now. I need you in my corner right now." The words came out quieter than I intended, but they hung in the air between. Use like a challenge. Marcus stopped getting dressed and looked at me directly for the first time that morning. "Janice, come on. You're strong. You're successful. You have everything together. Sarah's falling apart. So that means I don't matter?" Of course you matter." He sat on the bed next to me, reaching for my hands, but his touch felt mechanical. "You matter more than anything. That's why I know you'll understand. That's why I know you won't make this harder than it has to be." I pulled my hands away. "How long have you been planning this?" "Planning what?" "Sarah's birthday celebration." "How long have you known about it?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I watched his face cycle through different expressions as he calculated how much truth to tell me. "A few weeks," he said finally. "A few weeks." I stood up, needing distance from him. "You've known for weeks that today was Sarah's birthday, and you never once thought to mention that it was also our anniversary." "I thought we could celebrate." "Both." "No." The word came out sharper than I intended. "No, Marcus. You thought you could choose both, and you chose her." "That's not fair, isn't it?" I walked to the dresser and picked up the watch box, the leather warm from sitting in the morning sunlight. "I spent 3 months getting this repaired for you. I made reservations at Chez Lawrence 6 weeks ago. I took the afternoon off work. But none of that matters because Sarah needs you." Marcus looked at the watch box in my hands, and for a moment, I saw something like regret flicker across his face. But then his jaw tightened, and I recognized the expression he got when he made up his mind about something. "Sarah's been in my life longer than you have," he said. "She was my first real relationship, my first love. I can't just abandon her when she needs me." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my chest tighten, that familiar sensation from childhood when a foster parent would explain why I was being moved to another home, why their biological children needed their attention more than I did. "Get out," I whispered. "Janice, get out." Louder this time. "Go to Sarah's birthday party. Go be the hero she needs. But don't come back here tonight expecting me to pretend this didn't happen." Marcus finished getting dressed in silence, his movements quick and agitated. At the bedroom door, he turned back. "You're overreacting," he said. "When you calm down, you'll see that I'm just trying to help a friend." After he left, I sat on our bed holding his grandfather's watch, listening to the sound of his car pulling. Out of our driveway, the reservation confirmation for Chez Laurent was still tucked in my purse, and I found myself staring at it, wondering if they'd let me cancel without the full 24 hours notice. But as I reached for my phone, I realized I wasn't going to cancel. I was going to go alone. I was going to order the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu, and I was going to toast the end of whatever foolish fantasy I'd been living in for the past 8 years. Because if Sarah had been in his life longer than me, then maybe it was time for me to start planning a life without him. I'd seen Sarah's face 100 times before I ever met her. She was there in Marcus's college photo albums, arms wrapped around his waist at fraternity parties, laughing at graduation, kissing him under mistletoe at some long-ago Christmas party. In every picture, she looked effortlessly beautiful long blonde hair, perfect smile, the kind of natural confidence that comes from never doubting your place in the world. College girlfriend, Marcus had explained casually when we first looked through his old photos together. We dated for 3 years. It ended when she got accepted to grad school in California and I stayed here for work. He'd said it with the fond detachment of someone remembering a pleasant chapter that had closed naturally, without drama or lingering regrets. I felt a small stab of something, not quite jealousy, but awareness that I was looking at someone who had been important to him in ways I was still earning. She was beautiful, I'd said, and Marcus had pulled me closer. Past tense, he'd emphasized. You're my present and future. That conversation had happened 6 years ago, and I thought about Sarah maybe 5 times since then. She was Marcus's past, filed away with his college textbooks and fraternity t-shirts, part of who he used to be, not who he was becoming with me until 8 months ago, when Marcus came home from a client networking event with news that felt casual at the time, but now seemed loaded with significance. You'll never guess who I ran into tonight, he'd said, loosening his tie as he sat down next to me on the couch. Sarah Mitchell, well, Sarah Henderson now. Or I guess it's back to Mitchell since she's getting divorced. I looked up from the legal brief I was reviewing, mildly curious. Sarah from college? Yeah, she moved back here about 6 months ago, when her marriage started falling apart. She looks exactly the same. Marcus had gotten that distant look people get when they're processing an unexpected reunion. It was weird seeing her after all these years. Good weird or bad weird? Just weird. He'd shrugged, but I caught him checking his phone more often than usual that evening. The next few weeks brought casual updates about Sarah's situation. Her husband had been controlling, possibly emotionally abusive. The divorce was getting messy because he was hiding assets. She was staying in a small apartment while lawyers fought over the house. She was struggling financially because she'd been out of the workforce for years, focusing on being a corporate wife. It's really sad, Marcus would say when her name came up. She gave up everything for this guy, and now she's starting over. At 32 with nothing, I'd felt genuine sympathy. I knew what it was like to start over with nothing, to rebuild your life from scratch while other people took their stability for granted. If Marcus could help an old friend navigate a difficult transition, that seemed like the kind thing to do. But gradually, Sarah's problems became a regular feature of our conversations. She needed advice about job interviews. She was having panic attacks about money. She was lonely and isolated. Didn't know anyone in town except Marcus. Could he recommend a therapist? A gym? A good place to get her car serviced? She's really lost, Marcus would say. And there was something in his voice when he talked about her that I couldn't quite identify. Protectiveness, maybe. Or nostalgia for the person he used to be when they were together. I started noticing things. The way Marcus would check his phone immediately when he got home, as if expecting important news. How he takes certain calls in another room, speaking in the lower, more intimate tone he usually reserved for family members. The gentle smile that would cross his face when he read certain text messages. Sarah's having a really hard day, he'd explain when I asked about the smile. I'm trying to keep her spirits up. 3 months ago, Marcus started seeing Sarah in person. Coffee meetings to discuss her financial planning. He said, lunch appointments to help her practice job interview skills, an evening at the bookstore because she was feeling isolated and needed to get out of the apartment. You could invite her over for dinner, I'd suggested one night, genuinely wanting to be supportive. I'd like to meet her properly. Marcus had seemed uncomfortable with the idea. She's pretty fragile right now. I think big social situations might be overwhelming, but coffee dates and lunch meetings weren't overwhelming? I'd started to ask the question, then stopped myself. I was being paranoid, letting my own insecurities about abandonment color a situation that was probably completely innocent. Still, I found myself looking more closely at those old college photos, studying Sarah's face and trying to understand what Marcus saw when he looked at her. In every picture, she seemed to glow with the kind of happiness that comes from being absolutely certain of your place in someone's heart. She looked like a woman who had never doubted she was loved. I pulled out my laptop and, after a moment of internal debate, searched for Sarah Mitchell on social media. Her profile was mostly private, but I could see enough to confirm that she was indeed beautiful, that the years had been kind to her, that she looked like the kind of woman men would want to rescue. Her recent posts were carefully curated glimpses of someone rebuilding her life inspirational quotes about new beginnings, photos of coffee cups with captions about gratitude, pictures of sunsets with reflections about finding strength in difficult times. She looked vulnerable but hopeful, wounded but resilient. She looked like someone Marcus would want to save. That night, lying in bed next to him, I found myself wondering what it would feel like to be Sarah, to have the kind of history with someone that made them drop everything to help you, to be someone's first love instead of their practical choice, to inspire the kind of devotion that made a man forget his anniversary. Marcus shifted in his sleep, and his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Even in the dark, I could see Sarah's name on the screen. The bank statement that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, mixed in with the usual bills and legal correspondence that cluttered our kitchen counter. I almost didn't open it. Marcus typically handled our joint account, monitoring while I focused on my business finances, but I had a client meeting that afternoon about a commercial property investment, and I needed to verify our available liquid assets. I was sipping my morning coffee, already mentally preparing for the presentation I'd give to the Henderson Group about their retail expansion, when the numbers on the page stopped making sense. March 3rd, transfer to S. Mitchell, $1,200 March 8th. Transfer to S. Mitchell, $800 March 5th. 10th, transfer to S. Mitchell, $1,500 March 22nd. Transfer to S. Mitchell, $900. 4 transfers in 3 weeks, totaling $4,400, all to Sarah Mitchell. I set down my coffee cup with trembling hands and read the entries again, hoping I misunderstood something. But there it was, in black and white. Marcus had been sending money to his ex-girlfriend from our joint account. Money that came from both our paychecks, from my successful legal practice and his financial advisory work. I flipped back through previous month statements, searching for patterns I'd missed. February showed 3 transfers to Sarah, totaling $2,800. January had 2 for $1,900. Going back further, I found the first transfer in December, $500 with a memo line that read temporary loan. By my count, Marcus had sent Sarah nearly $12,000 of our money over 4 months. $12,000 that could have gone toward our mortgage principal, our retirement savings, the vacation to Italy we'd been planning for our anniversary. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone to call Marcus, then stopped. What? Was I going to say that I'd discovered he was financially supporting his ex-girlfriend? That he'd been lying to me about money for months? That I felt like the biggest fool in the world for trusting him with our joint finances? Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into our online banking system, searching for more details about the transfers. Each one was marked as a personal transfer with various memo lines: car repair, legal fees, rent assistance, emergency, fund. All the reasons Marcus had casually mentioned when explaining why Sarah needed advice about her finances. But advice was supposed to be free. Financial planning consultations didn't typically include thousands of dollars in direct support, especially not from joint accounts that belonged partially to the advisor's current partner. I thought about all the times Marcus had mentioned Sarah's struggles, her difficulty finding work, her ex-husband's financial manipulation, her need for temporary assistance while the divorce was finalized. I'd listened sympathetically, even suggested ways Marcus might help her develop a budget or find resources for people in her situation. I never imagined he was helping her by literally handing over our money. The worst part was remembering our own financial conversations during the same period. When I'd suggested we increase our retirement contributions in January, Marcus had said we should wait until his client base grew. When I proposed refinancing our mortgage to take advantage of lower interest rates, he'd worried about the fees eating into our savings. When I'd wanted to book that trip to Italy for our anniversary, he'd asked if we could do something less expensive this year, all while sending Sarah Mitchell over $1,000 a month from our shared resources. I printed out 6 months of bank statements and spread them across the kitchen table, highlighting every transfer to Sarah in yellow. The pattern was clear small amounts at first, gradually increasing as the months progressed. What had started as a $500 temporary loan in December had become regular payments that exceeded our monthly grocery budget. Looking at the evidence laid out in front of me, I felt something shift inside my chest. It wasn't just anger, though. There was plenty of that. It was a cold, clinical fury that reminded me of how I felt when opposing counsel tried to slip deceptive language into a contract. Hoping I wouldn't notice, Marcus had been treating me like a mark, someone too trusting, or too distracted to pay attention to what was really happening with our money. He counted on my busy work schedule and my natural inclination to trust him to keep me from looking too closely at our finances, but he'd forgotten that I was a lawyer. I was trained to spot deception, to follow paper trails, to build cases from evidence that people thought they'd hidden well enough. And more importantly, I was someone who'd grown up with nothing and learned to protect what I'd earned. I thought about the conversation we'd had last night when I'd asked about buying new living room furniture. Marcus had suggested we wait a few months, said we needed to be careful about large purchases until his commission structure improved at work. While sending his ex-girlfriend enough money to buy a very nice couch, I gathered the bank statements into a neat pile and slipped them into a folder. The Henderson Group meeting would have to wait. I had a different kind of research to do now, and I was going to approach it with all the thoroughness I bring to a complex commercial litigation case. Because if Marcus thought he could manage my money and my emotions with the same casual deception, he was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. I waited until after dinner to bring out the bank statements. Marcus was relaxed, feet up on the coffee table, scrolling through his phone while a basketball game played on the television. He looked content, unsuspecting, like a man with a clear conscience. "We need to talk," I said, setting the folder on the coffee table between us. Marcus glanced up from his phone, and I watched his expression shift when he saw the serious look on my face. "What's wrong?" "I found something interesting in our bank statements today." I opened the folder and spread out 3 months of highlighted pages. "Care to explain why you've been sending money to Sarah Mitchell?" The color drained from Marcus's face as he looked at the evidence laid out in front of him. For a moment, he was completely still, and I could almost see him calculating how much I knew and how he might explain it away. "You went through our bank statements?" His voice had a defensive edge that immediately put me on guard. I was preparing for a client meeting and needed to verify our liquid assets. Imagine my surprise when I discovered we've been supporting your ex-girlfriend to the tune of $12,000. Marcus set down his phone and leaned forward, running his hands through his hair. "Janice, I can explain. I'm listening." "Sarah's in a really bad situation. Her ex-husband hid assets during the divorce proceedings, and her lawyer's fees are astronomical. She needed temporary help while she gets back on her feet. Temporary help from our joint account. Without discussing it with me, I knew you'd be understanding about it," Marcus said quickly. "You're compassionate, and you know what it's like to struggle financially. I thought you'd want to help." I picked up the most recent statement and pointed to the highlighted entries. $900 last week, $1,500 the week before. "This doesn't look like emergency assistance, Marcus. This looks like regular support payments. Her situation is complicated. Then uncomplicate it for me. I sat back and crossed my arms. Explain how your ex-girlfriend's financial problems became our financial responsibility. Marcus stood up and began pacing, a habit he developed when he felt cornered. Sarah gave up her career when she got married. She was supposed to be taken care of, and instead she got screwed over by a man who promised to love her. She's starting over with nothing, Janice. Nothing. And that's tragic. But it's not our problem to solve. How can you say that? Marcus stopped pacing and stared at me. She's a human being in crisis. She needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. You were in a position to provide it because I contribute to our joint account. Because my legal practice generates income that you've been distributing to your ex-girlfriend without my knowledge or consent. It's not like that. Then what is it like? I stood up too, matching his energy. Because, from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been using my money to play hero to a woman you used to sleep with. Marcus's jaw tightened. Don't make this about our past relationship. This is about basic human decency. No, this is about trust. This is about the fact that you've been lying to me for months while draining our savings to support someone else. I haven't been lying. You absolutely have been lying. I picked up the February statement. Remember when I wanted to increase our retirement contributions, and you said we needed to be conservative with our spending? You were sending Sarah $800 that same week. That was different. Remember when you said we couldn't afford the Italy trip because your commission structure was changing? You sent Sarah $2,800 that month. Marcus stopped pacing and looked at me with something that might have been guilt, but his voice remained defensive. Those were isolated incidents. Sarah was facing eviction, and then she had unexpected legal fees. Stop. I held up my hand. Just stop with the explanations and the justifications. I don't care about Sarah's problems, Marcus. I care about the fact that my partner has been deceiving me about money for months. I wasn't deceiving you. I was protecting you from having to worry about someone else's problems. By using my money to solve them, it's our money, and I made a judgment call about how to use it compassionately. I stared at him, feeling something cold settle in my chest. Our money! So you think you have the right to make unilateral decisions about thousands of dollars because we share an account? That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. I gathered up the bank statements and put them back in the folder. You think because we're partners, you can spend my earnings on your ex-girlfriend without consulting me. Janice, you're twisting this. Am I? I looked at him directly, studying his face the way I'd study opposing counsel during a deposition, because it seems pretty straightforward to me. You've been financially supporting another woman with money that partially belongs to me, and you never once thought my opinion on that arrangement might be relevant. Marcus sat back down heavily, his head in his hands. I knew you'd react like this. I knew you'd make it about jealousy instead of compassion. Jealousy? I felt my temper flare. You think this is about jealousy, isn't it? No, Marcus. This is about respect. This is about honesty. This is about the fact that you prioritized your ex-girlfriend's financial security over transparency with your current partner. We stared at each other across the coffee table, and I realized this conversation wasn't going to end with an apology or a promise to do better. Marcus genuinely believed he'd done nothing wrong. In his mind, he was the hero of this story, the generous man helping a woman in need, and I was the unreasonable partner making a big deal out of nothing. Sarah needed help, he said finally, his voice quiet but stubborn. I helped her. I'm not going to apologize for that. Then we have a problem, I said, standing up with the folder in my hands, because I'm not going to apologize for expecting honesty from the man I share my life with. I walked toward our bedroom, then turned back at the doorway. By the way, I said, my voice perfectly calm, I'll be removing myself from our joint account tomorrow. If you want to support Sarah Mitchell, you can do it with your own money from now on. The look of shock on Marcus's face told me everything. I needed to know about how much of our money had actually been mine. The next morning, I sat in my office staring at a stack of case files that suddenly felt very personal. Davis v. Davis, a divorce case where the husband had been secretly supporting his mistress with joint funds. Martinez v. Martinez Financial, infidelity involving hidden credit cards and undisclosed debts. Thompson v. Thompson, a wife who discovered her husband had been paying his ex-wife's expenses beyond court-mandated support. All cases I'd handled with professional detachment, viewing them as straightforward matters of asset division and breach of fiduciary duty. Now, reviewing the files with fresh eyes, I saw my own life reflected back at me in uncomfortable detail. "You look like hell," said Rachel Chun, my law partner, as she knocked on my office door around 10 a.m. "Everything okay?" Rachel and I had built our practice together 5 years ago, both of us ambitious women who tired of making money for senior partners at larger firms. She specialized in corporate law while I handled real estate and family matters, and we'd developed the kind of professional relationship that occasionally drifted into personal territory. "Hypothetical question," I said, gesturing for her to sit down. "If someone discovered their partner had been sending money to an ex without disclosure, what would you advise them to do?" Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Hypothetically, I'd tell them to document everything, separate their finances immediately, and prepare for the possibility that there's more they don't know about. Even if the partner claimed it was just helping a friend in need, especially then." Rachel leaned back in her chair, studying my face. "Janice, please tell me this isn't about you and Marcus." I pulled out the bank statements I'd been carrying around since yesterday and handed them to her. $12,000 over 4 months to his college ex-girlfriend. Without my knowledge. Rachel whistled low as she scanned the highlighted entries. "Holy shit, this is serious money." "That's what I thought. Have you confronted him about it?" "Last night." "He's convinced he's being compassionate. I'm convinced he's being deceptive." Rachel set down the statements and looked at me with the sharp focus she brought to complex legal problems. "From a legal standpoint, you have grounds for a claim of financial misconduct if this relationship ends badly. Joint account or not, using shared funds for undisclosed purposes could be considered a breach of fiduciary duty. And from a personal standpoint, I've seen this story too many times." Rachel gestured toward the case. "Files on my desk. It starts with financial support and ends with emotional involvement. Sometimes it's innocent, but usually it's not." I thought about the Davis case, where we discovered the husband had been supporting his mistress for 2 years while telling his wife they couldn't afford a second child. The Martinez case, where undisclosed credit card debt had funded an affair that lasted 18 months. The Thompson case, where helping an ex-wife with expenses had actually been financing a renewed romantic relationship. "The pattern is always the same," I said, more to myself than to Rachel. "Gradual increases in financial support, secrecy about the extent of the help, and emotional justifications for behavior that's fundamentally about betrayal." "You sound like you're analyzing a case file." "Maybe I am." I picked up the Davis file and flipped through it. "Look at this timeline. It started with small amounts, a few $100s for emergency expenses. Then it escalated to regular monthly payments. By the end, he was spending more on his mistress than on his wife, Janice, and the justifications were always the same. She needed help. She was vulnerable. She didn't have anyone else to turn to. He was just being a good friend." Rachel was quiet for a moment, watching me process the parallels between my professional cases and my personal situation. "What are you going to do?" "What I would advise any client to do. Protect my assets, document the deception, and prepare for the possibility that this relationship is not what I thought it was." "Are you going to hire a private investigator?" The question hung in the air between us. In my practice, I routinely recommended PAs to clients who suspected their spouses of financial or emotional infidelity. The evidence they provided was always more extensive than what clients had discovered on their own. "I'm thinking about it," I admitted. "I know someone good. Discreet, thorough, reasonable rates." "Of course you do." Rachel smiled grimly. "Occupational hazard of family law practice. We know all the investigators and most of the divorce attorneys in town. I looked at the bank statements again, thinking about Marcus's defensive reaction when I confronted him. His immediate assumption that I was being unreasonable. His refusal to apologize for what any rational person would consider a significant breach of trust. The thing that bothers me most, I said slowly, is how sure he was that I'd be understanding about it. Like, he'd already decided that my feelings about our shared money didn't matter. That's not compassion, Rachel said. That's entitlement. Exactly. I felt something click into place, a clarity I'd been missing since I first saw Sarah's name on our bank statements. He wasn't trying to help Sarah. He was trying to be the hero in her story, and he was willing to use my money to fund that fantasy. And now? Now I'm going to find out exactly what kind of fantasy we're dealing with. I reached for my phone and looked at Rachel. What was the name of that investigator? Mike Torres. He's expensive, but worth it. And Janice? Rachel stood up to leave, then turned back. Whatever you find out, remember that you're stronger than you think you are. You build a successful practice from nothing. You survived foster care and law school and starting your own firm. You can survive this too. After she left, I sat alone in my office, surrounded by case files that told stories of betrayal and recovery, of women who discovered their partners were not who they claimed to be, and had found the strength to rebuild their lives anyway. I thought about the Janice who'd signed the deed to our house 3 years ago, trusting and hopeful and eager to build something permanent with Marcus. She'd been naive, perhaps, but she'd also been brave enough to risk everything for love. Now I needed to be brave enough to risk everything for truth. Mike Torres called me on a Thursday afternoon exactly 1 week after I'd hired him. I was in the middle of reviewing a commercial lease agreement when his name appeared on my phone, and my heart immediately started beating faster. Ms. Wood, I have the report you requested. When would be a good time to meet? Now, I said without hesitation. Can you come to my office? I'll be there in 20 minutes. I spent those 20 minutes pacing my office, trying to prepare myself for whatever Mike had discovered. Part of me hoped he found nothing, that Marcus really was just helping an old friend, that my suspicions were the product of an overactive legal mind trained to see deception everywhere. But a larger part of me, the part that had learned to trust my instincts through years of examining evidence and reading people, knew that Mike Torres was about to confirm what I already suspected. Mike was a former police detective, probably in his 50s, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen everything and been surprised by very little. He sat across from my desk with a manila folder that seemed thin for a week's worth of investigation. I'll give you the summary first, he said, opening the folder. Your boyfriend and Sarah Mitchell are in a romantic relationship? Based on my surveillance, it appears to have been ongoing for approximately 4 months. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting them. Hearing it confirmed made it real in a way that my suspicions hadn't. Show me, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Mike spread out a series of photographs across my desk. Marcus and Sarah, at a coffee shop, their hands intertwined across the table. Marcus and Sarah entering our apartment building together on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus and Sarah kissing in his car outside a restaurant I didn't recognize. These were taken over the past week, Mike explained. But based on what I observed, this isn't a new development. They're comfortable with each other, familiar. This has been going on for a while. I picked up the photograph of them kissing and studied it closely. Marcus looked happy in a way I hadn't seen in months relaxed. Content, like a man who'd found something he'd been missing. There's more, Mike said, pulling out a second set of documents. Financial records show that the money transfers to Ms. Mitchell's account correspond with dates when she's paid rent, utilities, and credit card bills. Your boyfriend has essentially been covering her living expenses. For how long? Based on bank records I was able to access through public databases related to her divorce proceedings, the support started in December. The romantic relationship appears to have begun in January. I did the math in my head. Marcus had been financially supporting Sarah for a month before they became romantically involved again. He'd been positioning himself as her savior, making himself indispensable to her financial survival before moving back into her emotional life. Was he seeing her before her divorce was final? Her divorce was finalized in February. Based on my investigation, the physical relationship started in January, but they were in regular contact throughout her separation period. I felt sick. Not just because Marcus had been cheating on me, but because of how calculated it all seemed. He'd orchestrated Sarah's dependence on him, made himself essential to her financial stability, and then used that leverage to rekindle their romantic relationship. "There's one more thing," Mike said, pulling out a final document. "Miss Mitchell has been having financial difficulties, but they're not entirely related to her divorce. She has significant credit card debt and a history of financial instability. That predates her marriage. Meaning your boyfriend isn't just helping her transition after a difficult divorce. He's enabling someone with chronic financial problems who may see him as a long-term solution to her money management issues." I studied the photographs again, looking for signs I'd missed, clues that should have been obvious. In every image, Sarah looked beautiful, grateful, adoring. She looked at Marcus the way I used to look at him, like he was someone capable of solving all her problems. "What's your professional assessment?" I asked. Mike was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "In my experience, men who financially support their ex-girlfriends while maintaining relationships with other women are usually trying to manage multiple relationships without losing access to either. Your boyfriend wants to keep you for stability, and Sarah for excitement. The money ensures Sarah's availability, while your joint finances ensure his own security. So, I'm being used." "You're being manipulated," Mike corrected. "Your financial success is subsidizing his ability to maintain a relationship with another woman." I gathered up the photographs and documents, my hands surprisingly steady. "Thank you, Mike. Send me your final bill, Ms. Wood." Mike stood up to leave, then hesitated. For what it's worth, I've seen a lot of these situations. The women who recover fastest are the ones who act decisively once they know the truth. Don't let him gaslight you into thinking this is somehow your fault or that you're overreacting. After Mike left, I sat alone in my office with the evidence of Marcus's betrayal spread across my desk. 8 years of what I thought was a loving, committed relationship reduced to a stack of photographs and financial records that told a completely different story. I thought about all the times Marcus had made me feel unreasonable for questioning his relationship with Sarah, all the ways he convinced me that my concerns were about jealousy rather than legitimate suspicions. I thought about his righteous indignation when I'd confronted him about the money transfers, his insistence that he was just helping a friend in need, but mostly, I thought about the look on his face in that photograph where he was kissing Sarah Pure. Happiness. The expression of a man who'd gotten exactly what he wanted. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Marcus's contact information. For a moment, I considered calling him, demanding an explanation, giving him a chance to lie to me some more. Instead, I deleted his number and started planning my next move, because if Marcus thought he could use my money to fund his affair while keeping me as his financial safety net, he was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. I made it home before the breakdown hit. Somehow, I managed to drive from my office to our house, my house. I corrected myself without falling apart. I'd even stopped at a red light and waited patiently while an elderly man crossed the street with his walker as if this were just another ordinary Thursday afternoon, and I hadn't just discovered that my 8-year relationship was built on lies. But the moment I closed the front door behind me, the careful composure I'd maintained in Mike, Torres's presence crumbled completely. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the hardwood floor of our entryway, Mike's photographs scattered around me like evidence of a crime scene. Which, in a way they were. The crime of stolen time, stolen trust, stolen years of my life that I'd given to someone who was using them to fund a relationship with someone else. The sob that came out of me was raw, primal, the sound of something breaking. That couldn't be fixed. I pressed my hands against my mouth, trying to contain it. But the grief was bigger than my ability to control it. 8 years. 8 years of believing I'd finally found someone who would stay. Someone who chose me not out of obligation or temporary convenience, but out of genuine love. 8 years of building a life with someone who'd been systematically dismantling it behind my back. I crawled across the floor to where Mike's report lay open, finding the photograph of Marcus and Sarah kissing. In it, Marcus looked younger somehow, happier than I'd seen him in months. He looked the way he used to look at me in those early years when everything felt possible and permanent. When had he stopped looking at me that way? When had I become the obligation and Sarah become the joy? I thought about the foster homes that had taught me that love was conditional. Temporary, something that could be withdrawn without notice when someone better came along. I thought I'd overcome that childhood programming when I met Marcus. I thought I'd finally found someone who proved that family could be chosen, that commitment could be real, that I was worth staying for. But I'd just been fooling myself. Marcus had stayed with me for the same reason foster families had kept me: convenience, financial benefit, the appearance of stability, while their real affections lay elsewhere. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I saw Marcus's name on the screen. Working late tonight. Don't wait up for dinner. Working late. With Sarah, probably. Planning their future while I sat on the floor of the house I'd helped buy, surrounded by evidence of my own stupidity. I pulled out the crumpled foster care placement letter I still carried in my wallet, a reminder of where I'd come from and why I'd worked so hard to build something permanent. The letterhead was faded now, the social worker's signature barely legible, but I could still read the words that had shaped my understanding of love. Temporary placement pending more suitable arrangements. That's all I'd ever been to anyone. Temporary placement, a suitable arrangement until something better came along. I must have sat there for hours, cycling through grief and rage in a bone deep. Exhaustion that came from years of trying to be enough for people who'd already decided. I wasn't. The sun had set, and the house was dark except for the streetlight streaming through our front windows. When I finally stood up, my legs were stiff, and my face was swollen from crying. I walked through the house we'd chosen together, seeing it with new eyes. The kitchen where Marcus made me coffee on weekend mornings. How many of those mornings had he been thinking about Sarah? The living room where we'd planned our future. Had any of those plans been real to him, or just comfortable lies he told to keep his life stable while he pursued what he actually wanted? I ended up in our bedroom, staring at the bed where Marcus slept peacefully every night while conducting an affair funded by my money. The closet full of clothes I'd helped him buy for work events, where he probably met Sarah. The dresser where his grandfather's watch still sat in its presentation box, untouched since our anniversary disaster. Something inside me shifted from grief to cold, crystalline anger. Not the hot fury I'd felt when I first discovered the bank transfers, but something harder and more purposeful. Marcus had made calculated decisions about my life, my money, my future. He treated me like a resource to be managed rather than a person to be respected. It was time for me to make some calculated decisions of my own. I pulled out my laptop and began researching property law, asset division, the legal rights of unmarried partners in long-term relationships. I took notes the way I would for any complex case, organizing my thoughts and identifying my options. Marcus thought he was managing the situation, keeping both women satisfied while maximizing his own benefits, but he'd forgotten something crucial about me. I hadn't survived foster care and built a successful legal practice by being passive when people tried to take advantage of me. By midnight, I had a plan, and for the first time since Mike Torres had confirmed my worst fears, I felt something other than devastation. I felt powerful. I took Friday off from work and spent the day treating my personal crisis like the complex legal matter it had become. By Friday evening, I had spreadsheets, timelines, and a comprehensive strategy that would have impressed any of my corporate clients. The asset inventory was the most revealing part of the exercise. I'd always known I earned more than Marcus, but seeing our combined wealth laid out in black and white was sobering. My legal practice had generated significantly more income over our 8 years together, and my savings and investment accounts reflected that disparity. The house on Maple Street, purchased with a down payment that was 80% my money, monthly mortgage payments split evenly. But my higher income meant I'd effectively contributed more to the principal reduction over 3 years. Our joint investment account $127,000, with contribution records showing I deposited roughly $85,000. Over the years, while Marcus had added $42,000 my individual retirement accounts, $340,000, built through aggressive saving and smart investment choices that Marcus had often questioned as too conservative. His retirement savings, $23,000, reflecting someone who prioritized current spending over future security. The joint checking account, currently at $8,400. Though it had been as high as $15,000 before Marcus started his Sarah support payments. My individual business accounts, $89,000 in operating capital, plus real estate investments worth approximately $450,000. Marcus's individual assets, his car, some electronics, and about $3,000 in a personal checking account. The numbers told a clear story. I had built substantial wealth through disciplined saving and smart investing, while Marcus had lived comfortably on our combined income without building significant assets of his own. And now I understood why he'd been treating our relationship like a financial safety net while pursuing his real desires elsewhere. I called my financial advisor, Patricia Kim, and scheduled an emergency meeting for Monday morning. Patricia had helped me structure my investments and had occasionally expressed concern about how much financial risk I was taking by combining resources with someone who wasn't legally bound to me. "You should protect yourself better," she'd said more than once. "Unmarried partners don't have the same legal protections as spouses. If something happens to this relationship, you could be vulnerable." At the time, I'd brushed off her concerns as unnecessary paranoia. Marcus and I were committed to each other. We didn't need a piece of paper to make our relationship real. We trusted each other completely. How naive that seemed now. I also made appointments with my estate planning attorney and with Rachel to discuss the legal implications of my situation. Washington was a community property state, but the laws were different for unmarried couples. Most of my assets would remain mine in a separation, but the house and joint accounts would require more careful handling. The most important call was to a forensic accountant I've worked with on complex divorce cases. If Marcus had been hiding other financial activities, and men who conducted affairs often had multiple deceptions running simultaneously, I wanted to know about it. Saturday morning, I drove to the bank and opened a new individual checking account, then transferred my portion of our joint funds into it. I left exactly half of the balance, plus enough to cover Marcus's pending automatic payments. I wasn't trying to steal from him. I was protecting what was rightfully mine. That afternoon, I changed the passwords on all my individual accounts and set up new online banking access that Marcus wouldn't be able to monitor. It felt strange to be taking these defensive measures against someone I trusted completely just a week ago, but it also felt necessary. Sunday, I spent the day going through our shared possessions and making lists. The furniture we'd bought together, the kitchen appliances, the art we'd collected during trips. I photographed everything and noted which items I'd purchased individually versus what we'd bought as a couple. It was methodical, emotionally draining work, but it gave me a sense of control that I hadn't felt since this whole nightmare began. I was taking action instead of just reacting. I was protecting my interests instead of hoping Marcus would suddenly develop integrity. Marcus spent the weekend visiting his brother in Portland, a lie I now recognized as probably covering a romantic getaway with Sarah. He texted occasionally with updates about traffic and family news, maintaining the fiction of our relationship even as he was actively destroying it. I responded normally to his messages, playing the role of the trusting girlfriend while I systematically documented our financial entanglement and planned my exit strategy. If Marcus could compartmentalize his life and manage multiple relationships through careful deception, then I could certainly manage one conversation while preparing to end it. By Sunday night, I had a complete picture of our financial situation, a clear understanding of my legal rights, and a plan for protecting my assets while giving Marcus exactly what he deserved, which was significantly less than he was expecting. I felt calm for the first time in weeks, the kind of focused clarity that came from having a strategy and the resources to execute it. Marcus had been playing a game where he made all the roles, and I didn't even know we were competing, but the game was about to change. And this time, I would be the one controlling the outcome. Monday morning, I sat in Edward Morrison's office reviewing the most important document revision of my life. Edward had been my estate planning attorney for 5 years, and he'd handled the original will that now seemed like evidence of my former naivety. "You're absolutely certain about these changes?" Edward asked, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he reviewed the amendments. "Completely certain. The original will had been straightforward. Everything to Marcus if I died, with provisions for charity if we both died together. It had seemed romantic at the time, a declaration of commitment that proved our relationship was as permanent as any marriage. I'd updated it 3 years ago when we bought the house, adding specific language about the property and our joint investments. Now, reading through those old provisions, I felt embarrassed by my own trusting optimism. The new beneficiary structure is quite different," Edward observed. "You're removing Mr. Harrison entirely and establishing a trust for foster care advocacy?" "That's correct." I'd spent hours researching organizations that supported children aging out of foster care. Kids like I'd been who needed resources and mentorship to build stable adult lives. 50% of my estate goes to the trust, 30% to my law partner Rachel Chun to ensure business continuity, and 20% divided among 3 other charities. And you want to add the specific language about Mr. Harrison being explicitly excluded? Yes, that part was crucial. I wanted it absolutely clear that Marcus's exclusion was intentional, not an oversight that he could challenge later. I want the document to state that Marcus Harrison is specifically not a beneficiary and has no claim to any portion of my estate. Edward typed notes on his computer, occasionally glancing at me with the careful expression of someone who suspected there was more to this story than professional estate planning. "Janice, I have to ask, are you making these changes in response to a temporary disagreement?" Because significant estate planning decisions made during emotional periods sometimes need to be reconsidered later. I'm making these changes in response to information that fundamentally altered my understanding of my relationship with Marcus. This isn't temporary anger, Edward. This is permanent protection. He nodded and continued typing. "The property provisions will need updating as well. You want to ensure the house on Maple Street goes to the trust rather than to Mr. Harrison?" "Absolutely. The house had been my dream, my symbol of permanence and belonging. I couldn't bear the thought of Marcus living in it with Sarah, using my investment as the foundation for their future together." "And your business interests?" "Rachel gets my share of the law firm, with provisions for her to buy out my interest at fair market value if she chooses not to maintain the practice. My real estate investments get liquidated and added to the trust fund." Edward was quiet for several minutes, updating the language and reviewing legal requirements. Finally, he looked up at me directly. "This is a substantial estate, Janice. You're talking about nearly $1 million in assets. Are you certain you don't want to leave anything to family members?" "I don't have family members," I said simply. "I have people who matter to me, and Marcus is no longer one of them." "What about your parents? Foster care, remember? No biological family in the picture, no adoptive family that maintained contact. After I aged out." Edward's expression softened. "I'm sorry. I should have remembered. It's fine. The point is, this estate represents everything I've built from nothing. Every dollar came from my work, my investments, my decisions. Marcus has no claim to it morally or legally, and now he won't have any claim to it financially either." We spent another hour working through the technical details witness requirements, notarization, the specific legal language needed to make. My intentions absolutely bulletproof. I wanted no ambiguity, no loopholes, no possibility that Marcus could manipulate his way into inheriting wealth he never helped create. "One more thing," I said as we wrapped up. "I want to add a provision that if anyone contests this will, they forfeit any gifts or bequests I might have made to them in other documents. The no contest clause." "That's wise." Edward made another note. "It prevents people from challenging the will just to see if they can get something." "Exactly." As I signed the new documents, I felt a profound sense of relief. For months, Marcus had been making decisions about our shared future without consulting me. He'd been planning his life with Sarah while maintaining his claim to my assets. Through our relationship, now I was making decisions about my future without consulting him. And unlike his deceptions, my choices were completely legal and entirely justified. The changes are effective immediately, Edward explained as he prepared the final copies. Your previous will is voided, and this document controls all disposition of your assets. I tucked my copy of the new will into my briefcase, next to Mike Torres's investigation report and my asset inventory spreadsheets. Everything Marcus thought he could count on my money. My house, my loyalty, my willingness to be deceived was now officially beyond his reach. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Marcus could keep spending my money. On Sarah for now, I'd address that deception soon enough. But he could no longer count on my death making him wealthy. And he'd never again have the security of knowing that my assets would cover his poor financial planning. I'd spent 8 years building wealth and sharing it generously with someone I loved. Now that love was gone, but the wealth remained. And it was going to people who actually deserved it. Foster kids who needed advocates. Rachel, who'd been a true partner in building something meaningful. Charities that helped vulnerable people without expecting anything in return. Everyone except the man who'd betrayed my trust and stolen my money to fund an affair. For the first time since discovering Marcus's deception, I smiled genuinely. It felt like the beginning of justice. Tuesday evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and 3 separate file folders spread in front of me. Financial records, photographic evidence, and what I was calling digital documentation. For the past 2 days, I'd been building a case against Marcus with the same thoroughness I'd bring to a major commercial litigation. The financial evidence was the strongest foundation. I printed 6 months of bank statements, highlighting every transfer to Sarah Mitchell in yellow, and adding handwritten notes about what Marcus had told me he was spending money on during the same periods. The pattern was damning every time he'd claimed we needed to be conservative with our spending. He'd actually been sending hundreds or thousands of dollars to his ex-girlfriend. March 5th, 10th, $1,500. Transfer to S. Mitchell. Same day Marcus said, we couldn't afford the kitchen renovation we'd been planning. March 22nd, $900. Transfer to S. Mitchell. 3 days after Marcus suggested we postpone our anniversary trip to Italy because of uncertain business conditions. April 3rd, $1,200 transfer to S. Mitchell. Week. Marcus said his commission structure was changing and we should reduce our retirement. Contributions that the forensic accountant I'd hired had uncovered additional financial deceptions. Marcus had taken cash advances on a credit card I didn't know he had, presumably to cover some of Sarah's expenses without creating a paper trail through our joint account. The credit card statement showed charges at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels in Portland when he'd supposedly been visiting his brother, and purchases at lingerie stores that definitely hadn't been for me. But the digital evidence was equally revealing. Since learning about Marcus's affair, I'd started paying closer attention to his phone and computer habits. He'd become careless, probably assuming I was too trusting or too busy to investigate. His laptop, which he often left open on the kitchen counter, had revealed a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. Email threads with Sarah discussing their future plans. Text message archives that painted a clear picture of an affair that had been both emotional and physical for months. Calendar entries for appointments he'd never mentioned to me. The most damaging evidence was a series of emails between Marcus and Sarah from February, just after her divorce was finalized. I can't wait until we don't have to sneak around anymore. Janice is starting to ask questions about money, but I can handle her. She trusts me completely. Are you sure you want to end things with her? She's been good to you, and her allow your money has been helpful for both of us. Don't worry about Janice. She's stronger than she looks, and she'll land on her feet. Besides, it's not like we're married. I don't owe her anything legally. I just feel guilty sometimes. She seems to really love you. Love isn't always enough. You and I have history, real history. What Janice and I have is comfortable, but it's not the same thing. Reading those emails have been like getting punched in the stomach repeatedly. The casual dismissal of our 8-year relationship, the calculation behind his deception, the complete lack of respect for what I contributed to his life. It was worse than discovering the affair itself. But from a legal standpoint, Those emails were pure gold. They proved premeditation, showed Marcus's awareness that he was deceiving me, and demonstrated his intention to end our relationship while continuing to benefit from my financial support. I'd screenshot everything and saved it to 3 different cloud storage accounts, ensuring that even if Marcus discovered my investigation and tried to delete evidence, I'd have multiple copies of everything. Mike Torres had also provided additional surveillance photos from the past week. Marcus and Sarah at her apartment. Marcus and Sarah grocery shopping together like a domestic couple. Marcus and Sarah looking at real estate listings on a tablet, while having coffee, apparently planning their next living situation. That last photo had been particularly illuminating. If they were looking at houses together, this wasn't just an affair, it was Marcus planning his exit strategy from our relationship. He was setting up his next life while still benefiting from the current. I'd also hired a second private investigator to dig deeper into Sarah's background. What I'd learned explained a lot about why she'd targeted Marcus for financial support. Sarah had a pattern of financial instability that predated her marriage. College debt that had never been paid off. Credit card balances that had been accumulating. For years, a history of borrowing money from friends and family members that was rarely repaid. Her ex-husband hadn't hidden assets during their divorce. There simply hadn't been many assets to hide because Sarah's spending had consumed most of their income throughout their marriage. In other words, Sarah wasn't a vulnerable victim of a bad divorce. She was someone with chronic money management problems who'd identified Marcus as a solution to her financial difficulties. The timeline was telling. Sarah had reached out to Marcus just 2 months after her separation, when her temporary spousal support was ending and she was facing the reality of supporting herself. She'd positioned herself as needing advice about financial planning, but what she'd actually needed was someone to pay her bills. And Marcus, flattered by the attention of his first love and enjoying the role of white knight, had been happy to oblige with my money. I organized all the evidence into a comprehensive portfolio that told the complete story: financial deception, emotional betrayal, and calculated manipulation designed to benefit both Marcus and Sarah. My expense. It was the kind of documentation that would protect me in any legal proceeding. But more importantly, it was ammunition for the conversation I was finally ready to have with Marcus. Because after a week of investigation and strategic planning, I was done being the unknowing victim in this situation. It was time for Marcus to learn that the woman he'd been deceiving was significantly more formidable than he'd assumed, and it was time for both Marcus and Sarah to discover that their comfortable arrangement was about to become very expensive for them and very profitable for me. I waited until Marcus came home from work on Wednesday evening, timing the conversation for when he'd be tired and less likely to think quickly on his feet. He walked through the door at his usual 6:45, loosening his tie and checking his phone, in the distracted way that had become his routine. "How was your day?" he asked, kissing my cheek with the casual affection of someone who had no idea his world was about to implode. "Productive," I said. "I need to show you something." I led him to the dining room, where I'd arranged my evidence like a prosecutor presenting a case to a jury. Bank statements, photographs, printed emails, and credit card records covered the entire table in organized stacks. Marcus stopped dead when he saw the display, his face going pale as he recognized some of the documents. "Sit down," I said, my voice calm and professional. He remained standing, his eyes darting across the evidence. As he tried to assess how much I knew, "Janice, what is this?" "This is the truth about what you've been doing for the past 4 months." I picked up the first stack of bank statements. $12,000 transferred to Sarah Mitchell from our joint account. Money, you told me, was for temporary assistance to help an old friend. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. I moved to the photographs. "This is Sarah Mitchell, the friend you've been helping?" "Taken last week by a private investigator I hired." I spread out the images of them together, holding hands, kissing, shopping for groceries like a couple. "You hired a private investigator?" Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "I did. And I hired a forensic accountant." I showed him the credit card statements he thought I didn't know about. $1,700 in additional expenses related to your relationship with Sarah, hotels, restaurants, gifts. all while you were telling me we needed to cut back on spending. Marcus finally sat down, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for one of the photographs. I can explain. No? I cut him off. You can listen, because I'm not finished. I pulled out the printed emails. These are from your email account, which you left open on your laptop. Discussions with Sarah about your future plans and how you could handle me when I started asking questions about money. Marcus read the first few lines of his own emails, and I watched the color drain completely from his face. Here's what's going to happen. I continued, my voice steady and controlled. You have exactly one choice to make, and you have until tomorrow evening to make it. You can end your relationship with Sarah immediately, move back into the guest room, and we can attempt to rebuild our relationship under completely new terms. Or you can move out this weekend and we can proceed with separating our lives entirely. Janice, I'm not finished. I opened a manila folder containing the contract I'd had Rachel help me draft. If you choose to stay, these are the non-negotiable conditions. First, you will reimburse our joint account for every penny you sent to Sarah Mitchell. Second, you will close your individual credit card and provide me with complete access to all your financial accounts. Third, you will sign this agreement acknowledging your financial misconduct and agreeing to mediation for any future disputes. About money. Marcus stared at the contract, scanning the terms with growing disbelief. You want me to pay you back $12,000 plus interest, plus the cost of the private investigator and forensic accountant you made necessary. Total restitution is $14,600. I don't have that kind of money. Then you'll need to get a loan, or sell something, or ask Sarah to help you since she's the one who benefited from the theft. It wasn't theft. It was absolutely theft. I pulled out a legal brief I prepared, taking money from joint accounts. For undisclosed purposes without the consent of the other account holder constitutes financial misconduct. In some circumstances, it's prosecutable as fraud. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, reading through the contract terms. And if I choose to leave, then we separate our finances immediately. You move out by Sunday, and I keep everything that's legally mine, which, as it turns out, is most of what we own together. I showed him the asset inventory I prepared. The house is in both our names, but I have provided 80% of the down payment, and my higher income has covered most of the mortgage principal. In a legal separation, I'd likely be awarded the house with an obligation to buy out your minority interest. Marcus studied the numbers, and I could see him calculating what his actual financial position would be without access to my income. And assets. Our joint investments would be split 50-50. I continued, but my individual retirement accounts, business interests, and real estate investments remain entirely mine. Your assets consist of your car, some personal belongings, and about $3,000 in individual savings. You've really thought this through, Marcus said quietly. I've had time to think while you were busy planning your future with Sarah. I gathered up the photographs and put them back in their folder. What I haven't had time for is processing the emotional betrayal, which is why this conversation is about practical matters rather than feelings. Marcus looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd discovered his affair, I saw something that might have been genuine remorse in his eyes. I never meant for it to go this far, he said, but it did go this far, and now you have to choose what happens next. What if I choose to stay? What if I agree to your terms? Can we really get past this? I considered the question honestly. I don't know. 8 years of trust can't be rebuilt overnight. And I'm not sure I'm capable of loving someone who proved they could lie to me so easily. But I'm willing to try if you're willing to accept complete transparency and accountability. Marcus picked up the contract again, reading through the terms more carefully. These conditions are pretty harsh. They're fair. You stole from me, lied to me, and used my money to conduct an affair. The fact that I'm offering you any choice at all is more generous than you deserve. He was quiet for several minutes, and I could see him weighing his options. Stay with me under restrictive conditions that would require him to take responsibility for his actions, or leave and start over with Sarah, but without the financial security my income provided. Finally, he looked up at me. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow evening. But Marcus? I stood up and began gathering my evidence. Choose carefully, because this is the only choice you're going to get, and whatever you decide will be permanent. I left him sitting at the dining room table with the contract, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal, finally forced to confront the consequences of thinking he could deceive someone who'd built a successful legal career on reading people and uncovering truth. For the first time in weeks, I felt completely in control of my own life. Marcus didn't come home Thursday night. I'd expected some kind of response to my ultimatum by the evening deadline I'd set, but as the hours ticked by with no word from him, his choice became clear. He was picking Sarah and the fantasy of their renewed romance over the hard work of rebuilding trust with me. Friday morning, I woke up to a text message sent at 2:17 a.m. I'm sorry, Janice. I think it's better for both of us if I move out. I'll come by this weekend to get my things. That was it. 8 years reduced to a brief text message sent in the middle of the night, probably after he'd spent the evening with Sarah discussing their plans. But Friday afternoon brought a phone call that was much more interesting. Janice, it's Marcus. We need to talk. His voice sounded strained, less confident than the casual dismissal of his text message. I think we covered everything in my ultimatum and your response. No, listen. I've been thinking about this, and I made a mistake. I want to try to work things out. I was sitting in my office, reviewing a client contract, and I paused to give Marcus my full attention. Really? What changed your mind? I realized that what Sarah and I have isn't sustainable. She's got financial problems that go way deeper. Then I understood, and I can't afford to support both of us. There it was. The truth behind his sudden change of heart wasn't about love or remorse. It was about money. Marcus had apparently done the math and realized that leaving me for Sarah meant giving up his comfortable lifestyle for someone who would drain his limited resources. So you want to come back because Sarah is expensive? I asked. Let's not look. I made a mistake with Sarah. I got caught up in nostalgia and the excitement of something new. But what we have is real, Janice. What we built together matters. What we built together matters so much that you were willing to throw it away yesterday. I was scared. Your ultimatum felt like you were trying to control me, and I reacted badly. But I've had time to think, and I want to accept your terms. I leaned back in my office chair, processing this development. Marcus's change of heart was interesting, but not for the reasons he probably thought. Tell me about your conversation. With Sarah, I said. What do you mean? When he told her you were choosing me over her, how did that go? Marcus was quiet for a moment. She wasn't happy about it. I imagine not. Did you discuss the financial support you've been providing her? She's concerned about how she managed without my help. I bet she is. I made a note on my legal pad. And what did you tell her about that? I explained that I need to focus on my relationship with you. Marcus, let me ask you a direct question. Are you trying to come back to me because you realized you love me and want to rebuild our relationship? Or because you realize Sarah is a financial liability and I'm a financial asset? The long silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. It's not that simple, he said finally. Actually, it is that simple. You made your choice yesterday when you decided to leave rather than take responsibility for your betrayal. Now you're trying to change your choice because the financial implications became clear. Janice, please? I know I screwed up, but I'm willing to make it right. No, Marcus. You're willing to make it convenient for yourself. I pulled out the folder containing my evidence of his affair. Because here's what I think really happened. You told Sarah you were leaving me for her, and she probably reacted with excitement about your future together. But then you started talking about practical matters, where you'd live, how you'd support yourselves, what your life would actually look like without my income subsidizing it. And Sarah realized that a man with $23,000 in retirement savings and a history of poor financial decisions isn't actually the white knight she thought she was getting. That's not. And you realize that supporting Sarah on your income alone would mean a significant decrease in your standard of living. No more nice house, no more shared investment accounts. No more financial security. Just two people with expensive tastes and inadequate resources trying to build a life together. Marcus was quiet, which I took as confirmation that I'd accurately assessed the situation. So now you want to come back to me because I'm the safer choice. The woman with the successful practice and the asset portfolio and the ability to maintain the lifestyle you've gotten accustomed to. I want to come back because I realized I was being an idiot, Marcus said, his voice defensive. You were being an idiot, I agreed. But your text message last night wasn't the idiotic part. The idiotic part was thinking you could have both. Relationships simultaneously without consequences. So what are you saying? You won't give me another chance. I looked at the will amendment on my desk, the asset inventory that showed how much I'd built on my own, the evidence of Marcus's deception that I organized like a legal case. I'm saying your chance was Wednesday night when I offered you a choice with clear terms and consequences. You chose Sarah. The fact that you've now discovered that choice is financially inconvenient doesn't create a new opportunity for negotiation. Janice, I'll be home this evening to supervise while you collect your belongings. After that, any communication between us goes through attorneys. You're really going to throw away 8 years over one mistake? No, Marcus. You threw away 8 years when you decided to steal my money to fund an affair. I'm just refusing to pretend that didn't happen for your financial convenience. I hung up and sat quietly in my office for several minutes, processing the conversation. Part of me felt sad that our relationship was ending with such cold calculation rather than emotional closure. But a larger part of me felt relieved that Marcus had shown me exactly who he was when faced with a choice between accountability and convenience. He chose inconvenience. Every time when he started the affair, when he stole my money, when he tried to manage both relationships simultaneously, and now when he wanted to return to the more profitable option, I was done being anyone's convenient choice. It was time to start being my own first choice. Marcus arrived at the house Saturday morning with a U-Haul truck and an attitude that suggested he expected this process to be simple and amicable. He was wrong on both counts. I brought some friends to help with the heavy stuff, he said, gesturing to 2 guys I recognized from his softball league. We should be done in a couple hours. Actually, we need to establish some ground rules first. I handed him a document Rachel had helped me prepare. This is an inventory of shared property and my assessment of ownership based on purchase records. And contribution documentation. Marcus scanned the list, his expression shifting from casual confidence to growing concern. You're claiming ownership of almost everything. I'm claiming ownership of everything I can prove I paid for, plus half of what we purchased jointly. I pointed to specific line items. The living room furniture was bought with my credit card after you said you were temporarily short on cash. The kitchen appliances came from my individual savings account. The artwork we collected together gets split 50-50. Marcus's friends stood awkwardly by the truck, clearly uncomfortable with being present for what was obviously a hostile breakup rather than the friendly separation Marcus had probably described. This is ridiculous, Janice. We bought this stuff together as a couple. We bought this stuff with my money while you were spending our joint funds on your girlfriend. I pulled out my phone and showed him photos I'd taken of the receipts. I've documented the purchase history of every major item in this house. You can take what's legally yours, which is your personal belongings, and half of the items we genuinely purchased together. Marcus's softball friend shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should come back later when you two have worked this out privately. No, this is perfect timing, I said. Marcus can take his clothes, his electronics, his personal items, and the guest room bedroom set, which we split 50-50 when we bought it. Everything else stays. The guest room furniture? Marcus stared at me. Where am I supposed to sleep? I assume wherever you've been sleeping for the past 2 nights when you were making your decision about Sarah. His friends exchanged glances, clearly realizing they'd walked into a situation that was far more complicated than they'd expected. Look, said the taller one, maybe we should just help you get your clothes and personal stuff today, and you can work out the big items later. Smart suggestion, I agreed, because the big items are going to require legal documentation anyway. Marcus spent the next 3 hours packing his belongings while I supervised from the kitchen. occasionally consulting my inventory list when he tried to claim items I'd purchased individually. The process was tense but civil until he tried to pack the coffee maker I bought for his birthday last year. That was a gift, he protested when I stopped him. Gifts can be revoked when the recipient commits fraud against the giver, I replied calmly. Look it up. By noon, Marcus had loaded his personal belongings, his computer, his clothes, and half the guest room furniture into the U-Haul. As his friend secured the last load, he approached me for what I assumed would be his final attempt at negotiation. This doesn't have to be so hostile, he said. We loved each other for 8 years. That has to count for something. It counted. For everything until you decided to steal from me and lie to me for months. I handed him another document. This is a demand letter for restitution of the money you took from our joint account to support Sarah Mitchell. $14,600 due within 30 days. Marcus stared at the letter. You're really going to sue me? I'm really going to recover what you stole, yes. Whether that happens through voluntary payment or legal action is up to you. I told you I don't have that kind of money. Then you'll need to get it. Sell something, take a loan, ask Sarah to contribute, since she's the one who benefited from the theft. Sarah doesn't have any money. That's the whole point. Not my problem. I pulled out one final document. This is also notice that I'm claiming sole ownership of the house on Maple Street. Since I provided 80% of the down payment, and my income has covered the majority of the mortgage payments, I'm entitled to the primary interest in the property. Marcus read through the legal notice, his face growing pale. You're trying to take the house. I'm asserting my rightful ownership of the house. You're welcome to dispute my claim in court, but you'll need to provide documentation of your financial contributions, which I think we both know is limited. This is insane. You're destroying my life over a mistake. No, Marcus. You destroyed your life when you decided to commit financial fraud to fund an affair. I'm just protecting myself from further damage. His friends had finished loading the truck and were clearly eager to leave. Marcus looked back at the house we'd shared, and for a moment, I saw something like genuine regret in his expression. I never meant for it to happen this way, he said quietly. I know you didn't. You meant to keep both relationships going indefinitely. Using my money to maintain your lifestyle while enjoying the excitement of rekindling things with Sarah. What you didn't plan for was getting caught. Marcus climbed into the U-Haul without saying goodbye, and I watched from the front porch as they drove away. The house felt strange and empty without his presence, but it also felt peaceful in a way it hadn't for months. That afternoon, I met with Rachel to review the legal strategy going forward. The restitution claim is solid, she said, reviewing my documentation. Financial misconduct in domestic partnerships is treated seriously by the courts, especially when there's clear evidence of deception and harm. And the house? Even stronger. Your financial contribution records are impeccable, and Washington law favors the party who can demonstrate majority investment in property acquisition. What's my realistic timeline for resolution? Rachel considered the question carefully. If Marcus is smart, he'll negotiate a settlement within 60 days. If he wants to fight it, we could be looking at 6 months to a year of litigation. But honestly, based on what you've shown me, I don't think he has the resources to fight a prolonged legal battle, especially not while supporting Sarah and covering his own living expenses. Exactly. My guess is he'll try to negotiate a payment, plan for the restitution, and sign over his interest in the house in exchange for avoiding a public lawsuit that would expose the full extent of his financial misconduct. I felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that Marcus's poor decisions were finally catching up with him in ways that couldn't be managed or explained away. For months, he'd been making choices that benefited him at my expense. Now he was facing the consequences of those choices, and I was the one controlling the outcome. One more thing, I said to Rachel. I want to file a complaint with his professional licensing board about the financial misconduct. Financial advisors are supposed to meet higher ethical standards, and using joint funds to support an extramarital relationship seems like something his industry should know about. Rachel smiled. Now you're thinking like someone who wants complete accountability rather than just financial recovery. I am someone who wants complete accountability. Marcus thought he could deceive me without Consequences because I loved him too much to fight back. I want him to understand exactly how wrong he was about that. 3 weeks after Marcus moved out, I got an unexpected phone call at my office. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was one I'd been hearing about for months. Ms. Wood, this is Sarah Mitchell. I think we need to talk. I set down the contract I'd been reviewing and gave Sarah my full attention. I'm listening. I wanted to apologize for my part in what happened between you and Marcus. I know the situation has been difficult for everyone. That's thoughtful of you, I said carefully, wondering where this conversation was headed. I also wanted you to know that Marcus and I have ended our relationship. I thought you should hear that from me directly. No, that was interesting. I appreciate you telling me, though I'm not sure why you felt it was necessary. Sarah was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had a different quality, less confident, more vulnerable. I think I made some assumptions about Marcus that turned out to be wrong. What kind of assumptions? Financial assumptions, mostly. When he was helping me during my divorce, I thought he was successful enough to afford that kind of generosity. I didn't realize the money was coming from joint accounts with you. I could hear something in Sarah's voice that sounded like genuine regret. But I've learned to be suspicious of people who only developed consciences when their situations became inconvenient. Marcus presented himself as financially stable? I asked, more than stable. He talked about investments, property ownership, business opportunities. He made it sound like he was doing very well financially. And you discovered that wasn't accurate? Sarah sighed. When he moved in with me 2 weeks ago, he couldn't contribute much to rent or household expenses. He kept saying he was waiting for commission payments or that his accounts were temporarily frozen because of your legal action. But yesterday, my landlord served me with an eviction notice because we're 3 months behind on rent. I see. Marcus promised he could cover the back rent, but it turns out he doesn't have access to the kind of money he'd been giving me before. He'd been using your resources to support me, and now that those are gone, he can't maintain the lifestyle he was providing. The picture Sarah was painting made perfect sense. Marcus had been using my income to play the role of successful, generous boyfriend, but when that income was no longer available, he couldn't maintain the fiction. So you ended the relationship? I asked. We ended it together when we realized it wasn't sustainable. Marcus can't afford to support both of us, and I can't afford to support both of us either. We were basically two people with limited resources trying to live like we had unlimited money. And now? Now I'm facing eviction, Marcus is staying with his brother again, and I'm trying to figure out how to rebuild my life without depending on someone else to finance it. I found myself feeling an unexpected sympathy for Sarah. She'd made poor choices in getting involved with Marcus while he was still with me, but it sounded like she'd also been deceived about his actual financial situation. Sarah, can I ask you something directly? Of course. Did you know that Marcus was taking money from joint accounts to support you? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I suspected the money was coming from somewhere other than his individual income, but I didn't ask specific questions because I didn't want to know the answers. I was in a really difficult situation after my divorce, and Marcus seemed like a solution to problems I couldn't solve on my own. And when you found out he was in a committed relationship with me, I told myself that if he was willing to help me financially and spend time with me, his relationship with you couldn't be as serious as he'd initially claimed. I convinced myself that you were more like a roommate or a business partner than a romantic partner. At least she was being honest about her willingness to rationalize the situation for her own benefit. I know this doesn't change anything, Sarah continued, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry for my part in hurting you. I was desperate and selfish, and I made choices that harmed someone who didn't deserve it. I appreciate the apology, I said, and I realized I meant it. Sarah's actions had been wrong, but her honesty now was more than Marcus had ever offered. There's one more thing, Sarah said. Marcus mentioned that you're pursuing legal action for the money he gave me. I want you to know that I understand why you're doing that, and I don't blame you for it. Do you still have any of that money? Some of it? I used most of it for living expenses, but I have about $3,000 left in my account that I could return to you directly if that would help." The offer surprised me. He'd be willing to do that? I'd rather make this right than have it drag out in court. The money never felt like it was really mine anyway. It felt like I was borrowing it from someone I'd never met. "That's exactly what you were doing," I said, but without the anger I felt about the situation for weeks. I know that now. And I know it doesn't excuse my behavior, but I want to at least take responsibility for the part I can control. After we ended the call, I sat in my office thinking about the conversation. Sarah's willingness to return part of the money and her honest acknowledgement of her role in the deception was more accountability than I'd gotten from Marcus in 8 years. A relationship. It also confirmed what I'd suspected about the end of their relationship. When Marcus could no longer use my resources to fund his white knight fantasy, the foundation of his appeal to Sarah had crumbled. She'd been attracted to his apparent financial stability and generosity, not to Marcus himself, and Marcus had been attracted to feeling needed and important in Sarah's life, not to Sarah as a person. When their financial reality became clear, neither of them had been willing to work through the practical challenges of building a real relationship. I called Rachel to update her on Sarah's offer to return part of the money. "That's unusual," Rachel said. "Most people in her position would try to avoid any financial responsibility." I think Sarah learned some hard lessons about the difference between financial support and actual relationship sustainability. And Marcus learned that you can't maintain 2 relationships and 2 lifestyles on one person's income indefinitely. "So, what do you want to do about Sarah's offer?" I considered the question. $3,000 wouldn't make a significant difference to my financial situation, but accepting it would provide closure and demonstrate that there were consequences for participating in deception, even if those consequences were voluntary. "I'll take the money," I said, "and I'll consider the matter with Sarah closed. My focus should be on recovering the larger amount from the person who actually stole it." That sounds reasonable. And honestly, having Sarah cooperate rather than fight the restitution claim will probably make Marcus's position more difficult if this goes to court. How so? If the person who benefited from the stolen money admits it was wrong and voluntarily returns part of it, that makes it much harder for Marcus to argue that his actions were justified or that no real harm was done. I smiled at the elegant justice of that situation. Sarah's belated honesty and accountability would become evidence against Marcus's continued refusal to take responsibility for his choices. Sometimes, the best revenge was simply allowing people to face the natural consequences of their decisions. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making coffee on a Saturday morning. Looking out at the garden I'd finally had time to plant. The house felt completely different now, lighter, more peaceful, genuinely mine in a way it hadn't been even. When Marcus and I were happy together, the legal matters had resolved faster than Rachel had predicted. Marcus had negotiated a settlement rather than face a public lawsuit that would have exposed his financial misconduct to his professional community. He'd signed over his interest in the house, agreed to a payment plan for the restitution, and accepted a professional censure from his licensing board. Sarah had returned the $3,000 as promised and had sent a handwritten note thanking me for not pursuing legal action against her. She'd moved back to California to stay with family while she rebuilt her finances and career. Her honesty had made the entire resolution process smoother and had probably saved both of us thousands in legal fees. Marcus was living in a studio apartment and working extra hours to cover the monthly restitution payments. According to mutual friends, he'd been struggling with the financial reality of supporting himself without access to my income. He'd also been making half-hearted attempts to reconcile, sending occasional texts about how much he missed our life together. I blocked his number after the 3rd message. The man who'd stolen my money to fund an affair and then tried to return when the affair became inconvenient was not someone I needed to hear from again. The real surprise had been how much I enjoyed living alone. For 8 years, I'd structured my life around our relationship, our schedules, our shared goals, our compromises about everything from furniture to vacation destinations. Now I could make decisions based entirely on what I wanted, and the freedom was intoxicating. I'd redone the guest room as a home office, finally creating the workspace I'd always wanted. I'd replace the living room furniture with pieces I loved, instead of compromises between our different tastes. I'd planned a trip to Italy for next month, the anniversary trip Marcus had said we couldn't afford while he was sending thousands to Sarah Dot. My legal practice had thrived without the distraction of relationship stress and financial uncertainty. I'd taken on 2 major commercial clients and was considering hiring an associate attorney to help manage the growing caseload. But the most significant change was personal. I'd started volunteering with a local organization that helped teenagers aging out of foster care, using my legal skills to help kids navigate apartment leases, understand credit, and plan for college or careers. Working with young people who reminded me of my younger self had been both challenging and rewarding. "You seem different," Rachel had observed last week when we were reviewing quarterly business reports. "More confident, maybe. More yourself." She was right. I'd spent 8 years trying to be the perfect partner, understanding, supportive, financially generous, emotionally available. I'd molded myself around Marcus's needs and preferences, assuming that was what building a life together meant. Now, I was learning what it felt like to prioritize my own needs and preferences, and the result was a version of myself that was more decisive, more focused, and significantly happier. My phone buzzed with a text from David Chun, Rachel's brother, who I'd been seeing casually for the past month. We'd met at Rachel's birthday party, where he'd been impressed by my stories about the legal resolution of my relationship situation rather than threatened by my professional success or financial independence. "Still on for dinner tonight?" "I found a new Italian place that's supposed to be amazing." I smiled and texted back, "Perfect. Looking forward to it." David was different from Marcus in ways that had initially surprised me but now seemed essential. He was genuinely interested in my work and my opinions. He paid for his own meals and would have been horrified at the idea of using shared resources without discussion. He'd been clear about his own relationship history and had encouraged me to take whatever time I needed to process my experience with Marcus. Most importantly, David seemed to enjoy the confident, successful version of myself that had emerged from the wreckage of my relationship with Marcus. He wasn't looking for someone to rescue or someone to manage. He wanted a partner who was as independent and accomplished as he was. It was the kind of relationship I'd never thought to want because I never had the opportunity to be fully myself. Within a romantic partnership, I walked through my house, admiring the space I created entirely according to my own taste and priorities. The dining room where I confronted Marcus with evidence of his betrayal now housed the antique table I bought for myself, surrounded by chairs that were beautiful rather than practical. The living room reflected my love of rich colors and interesting textures instead of the neutral compromise Marcus had preferred, most symbolically. The bedroom was entirely my new furniture, new bedding, new artwork that I'd chosen without consulting anyone else's preferences. The property deed sat framed in my home office, showing my name as the sole owner. Next to it was my new will, directing my estate to causes and people who'd earned my trust and respect. Both documents represented the same thing, a life built according to my own values and priorities. Standing in my kitchen that Saturday morning, I realized I'd achieved something I'd never expected when I first discovered Marcus's betrayal 6 months ago. I not only recovered from the financial and emotional damage he'd caused, I'd used the experience to build a life that was significantly better than what I'd had before. The woman who'd signed a joint deed with Marcus 3 years ago had been loving but naive, generous but unprotected, trusting but unprepared for betrayal. The woman I was now had learned to be loving without being vulnerable, generous without being foolish, trusting without being blind. I thought Marcus was teaching me about commitment and partnership. Instead, he taught me about independence and self-protection. I thought losing him would mean losing the family I always wanted. Instead, I gained the most important relationship of all, a healthy, honest, protective relationship with myself. My phone rang, and I saw David's name on the screen. "Morning, beautiful. I know it's early, but I wanted to hear your voice before my day gets crazy." I smiled, appreciating the thoughtfulness of someone who called because he wanted to connect rather than because he needed something from me. "Good morning. How's your Saturday looking?" "Productive. I'm helping my sister move. then meeting you tonight for what I'm hoping will be the best Italian food in the city. Sounds perfect, Janice. David's voice had a different quality, more serious. I wanted to tell you something. I know we're taking things slowly, and I respect that completely. But I want you to know that I think you're remarkable. The way you handled your situation with Marcus, the way you've built your practice, the way you're helping those kids through your volunteer work. You're the kind of woman I never thought I'd be lucky enough to meet. I felt my chest warm a way that had nothing to do with romantic infatuation and everything to do with being genuinely seen and appreciated for who I actually was. Thank you, I said. That means more than you know. After we hung up, I walked out to my back porch with my coffee, looking at the garden I planted and the life I built from the foundation of my own strength and choices. Marcus had wondered why I'd changed my will, as if my decision to protect my assets was some kind of punishment directed at him. But it had never been about punishing him. It had been about finally understanding that I was worth protecting, that my life and my choices mattered, that I deserved relationships built on honesty rather than convenience. The foster care system had taught me that love was conditional and temporary. Marcus had reinforced that lesson through 8 years of taking my generosity for granted. But the experience of rebuilding my life on my own terms had taught me the most important lesson of all, that the most reliable love, the most lasting security, and the most meaningful commitment I could ever have was the one I made to myself, Dot, for the first time in my life that felt like more than enough. It felt like everything.